Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lora Rolling and this is part 14 of the Christmas lights ornament tutorial. This is the Christmas lights ornament that we are making. It is so cute and colorful. It has a wreath on the top and a wreath on the bottom. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. And today we're doing the unit called Top Wreath. If you haven't seen parts 1 through 13 yet, that's okay. You can do these out of order. I'll have those videos listed down below in the description. That way when you finish this one, you can go and watch those. We just have a few materials to get ready, so let's get them listed and then we can get started. Let's go. So the beads that we'll be using in today's video are all Miyuki Delicas. I have silver lined green, white pearl AB, opaque chartreuse AB, opaque yellow AB, opaque dark cranberry, and opaque delphinium. Just to keep it simple, I'm going to call this green, white, light green, yellow, red, and blue. We'll also need some beading thread and a beading needle. I like to use the Eslon Fire in the color Crystal, and I use 4-pound thread. You could also use a 6-pound thread if that's what you have. And I like to use a size 10 beading needle. You could use a size 12. For implements, I have long nose pliers to hold on to my thread at the end of the video, and I cut my thread with scissors. And then in the beginning, I'm going to end my tail using the fire method, and I'll show you how to do that today. We just need to thread our needle with 3 feet of thread, and then we can get started. So I have threaded my needle, and now I'm ready to pick up my first 3 beads. Let's pick up 3 green beads. And I'm going to take these beads and I'm going to pull them down to the bottom of my thread, leaving about a 6-inch tail. Now let's create a square knot, which means we're going to cross on top and then pull our tail through, and then we'll cross on top again and pull the tail through. So now we have 2 loops. Now I'm going to take my 2 fingers and I'm going to put them in the bottom loop, the one that has the beads, and then I'm going to pull tight the top loop until it becomes a knot. Now I have my tail, and I'm not going to touch it to the flame, but I am going to get it super close so that it melts the tip. Just a little bit so it turns into a teensy little knot. Now I'm going to pull on the long thread while I twist the loop until that little knot on the end of the tail touches the long thread. Just like that. Now I'm going to take my thumbnail and I'm going to pull the knot all the way down to the 3 beads until the 3 beads are in a tight little triangle. And that completes row number 1. Now I'm going to tug that little knot over to one side so that it looks like it's coming out of one of the beads. Now let's pick up our next 2 beads, which are both green again. Now it looks like I'm coming out of this bead, so I'm going to sew through the next bead, the one that the knot is furthest away from. And then I'm going to try to get those beads to sit upright so that they're sitting on top of their buddies. Now let's pick up 2 more beads. We'll pick up 1 light green and 1 dark green. And then we'll sew through the next bead. Once again, trying to get those beads to sit right on top of their buddies. Now, let's pick up 2 more green beads. Now remember, when I say green, I mean the dark green ones. So we're coming out of this bead, let's sew through the next bead and also sew through its buddy. So we're sewing through 2 beads, and each time we do that, what we're doing is we're putting our thread in position to start the next row. So we're stepping up to the next row. So this completes row number 2. Let's start row number 3 by picking up 2 green beads. Coming out of this bead, we're going to sew through the next. Now let's pick up 1 green bead. We're coming out of this second bead right here. The next bead would be setting down a little bit. We're going to skip the one that's set downward, and we're going to sew through the one that's poking up. We're going to call that our up bead. So let's pick up 2 more green beads. And we're coming out of this light green. Let's sew through the next. Now let's pick up 1 green bead. Skipping the down bead, we're going to sew through the up bead. Now let's pick up 1 green and 1 red bead and sew through the next. Now let's pick up 1 green bead. This will be the last bead in this row. We're skipping the down bead. We're going to sew through the up bead and its buddy. So we're sewing through the last 2 beads, and we have now completed this row, and now we get to start row number 4. Let's start with 2 green beads and sew through the next. Now let's pick up 1 green, sew through the up bead, pick up 1 green and sew through the up. I always turn my work as I go. It just makes it easier for me to sew. That might help you also. Let's pick up 2 green beads and sew through the next. Let's pick up 1 yellow bead and sew through the up. Let's pick up 1 green and sew through the up. Two green beads and sew through the next. One green and sew through the up, and 1 blue and sew through the up bead and also sew through the one beneath it. Sewing through 2 beads completes this row, and now we get to start row number 5. Let's start with 2 white beads. Always making sure that they sit correctly. 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 2 green beads, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 2 green beads, 1 green, 1 green, and 1 green. Sewing through the last 2 beads, and now we're ready to start row number 6. Let's start with 2 white beads, one white, one green, one green, one green, two green, one green, one green, one green, one green, two green beads, one green, one green, one green, and one white. This is the last bead in the row, so let's sew through the last 2 beads. And now we get to start row 7. Let's start with 2 white beads. Oops. I yanked it right out of my own hand. And I sewed through the wrong area. There we go. All the troubles I have. It's part of the love of beading, right? Alrighty, let's pick up 1 white, one green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 2 green beads, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, and 1 light green. One green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 white. Sewing through the last 2 beads, and this completes row number 7. Now this means that this is the top of our triangle, so we're going to continue to sew through the sides and the bottom, but we're not going to add any more beads to the top. So what we're going to do is, without picking up any beads, we're just going to sew through the next bead, putting our thread in position to start putting beads down this side. So row number 8 starts with 1 white, 1 white, 1 green, 1 red, 1 green, 1 blue, 1 green, and 1 white, 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 and 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 white, and 1 white. And we are back to the top of our triangle. Now we're coming out of this one. What we're going to do is we're going to start sewing down this side. So just to make it easier for me, because I'm very right-handed, I'm just going to turn over my triangle. So now I'm sewing down this side. So let's start row number 9 with 1 white bead, one white, one white, one light green, one green, one green, one green, one blue, and one white, 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 two white beads, one green, one green, one green, one green, one white, one white, and one white. You'll notice I don't have an up bead to sew through, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down that top bead, and then I'm going to put that new bead right in place. And now I'm coming out of the bottom of this bead. I'm going to sew down the next bead, and then I'm going to turn directions. I'm going to sew up the bead right next to the one I'm coming out of, and then I'm going to sew up that top bead again. Now we are at the top of this bead coming out. I'm going to sew down the new bead that we just added. Now I'm coming out of this top bead, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my unit again so that I can sew down this side. So let's start row number 10 with one white bead, one white, one green, one green, one green, one green, 1 green, 2 white beads, 1 white, 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 2 white beads, 1 green, 1 green, 1 yellow, 1 green, 1 green, 1 white, and 1 white. That completes row 10. Moving on to row 11, I'm going to turn my unit back over. So now we're coming out of the top of this bead. Let's start row 11 with 1 white, 1 white, 1 white, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 white, 2 white beads, 1 white, 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 1 red, 2 white beads, 1 white, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 white, 1 white, and 1 white. Once again, I don't have an up bead to sew our last white bead into, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down this top bead, and then I'm going to set that new bead right into place. Now we're coming out of the bottom of this center bead. I'm going to sew down the center bead in the next row, and then I'm going to sew up the bead right next to that one. Now let's sew up the center bead again, and then we can sew down the new bead that we just added. Turning our unit over, and now we are in position to start row number 12. Let's start with 1 white, 1 white, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 white, 2 white beads, 1 white, 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 2 white beads, 1 white, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 green, 1 white, and 1 white. Now we've finished our 12 rows. Let's turn our unit over. If this is the first triangle that you've done with me, you'll know that to add or to connect the other units, we need connection beads on some of the sides, and other sides don't need them at all. So on this particular unit, we are going to have connector beads on the right side and on the bottom, but we're not going to have any connector beads on this side. So let's start by adding the connector beads with one white, one white, one white, one green, one green, one green, one green, one white, and one white. Now we're down to our corner, and what we're going to do is we're going to cap this corner by adding one white bead, and you'll see that it turns that corner into a point, which is exactly what we want. So now let's start adding beads across. We're going to start with one white, one white, one white, one white, one yellow, one white, one white, one white, one white, one white, and one white. Once again, we need to cap our corner, so let's add one white bead, and that turns it into a point. Now let's turn our unit over, and without picking up any beads, we're going to sew up 6 beads. 1, 2, 3, whoops, 4, 5, and 6. So now we're coming out of the top of this green bead. We're going to sew down the blue bead. So we're going to zigzag. We're creating strength to the bead that we just added. And now we're going to sew up the bead right next to that blue bead. That zigzag makes this bead that we just added so much more secure. So let's do that again. Let's sew up 2 beads, one right above the bead that we're coming out of, and then another one right above that bead. And now let's zigzag again. We're coming out of the top of this bead. Let's sew down the bead right next to it, and then sew up the bead right next to that one. And then we'll sew up 2 more beads, the one right above that and the red one. And now I feel really good about how secure that bead is. It's not going to get loose while we're adding or connecting our units together. And so let's cut our thread by holding our thread with our long nose pliers and then putting our scissors as close to the bead as possible without cutting the bead, and then just cut the thread. And that completes our top wreath unit. We only need 4 of these, so go ahead and do this 3 more times, and I will see you in a second. That was so much fun. Thank you so much for being here with me today and beading along with me. Remember to like and subscribe and hit that bell button so you're notified when the next video comes out. I can't wait to see you there. Thanks for watching.